night, darling.
The clock is ticking for planet Earth, and time is running out. Unless we reverse the damage caused by humanity, we'll lose even more of our forests and natural habitats for wildlife and many important and endangered species. But there is hope. We can turn back the clock. Working with local communities, young people, and other partners, we're inspiring actions through the message of hope across every continent, protecting endangered species and their habitats, and creating a more harmonious relationship between people, animals, and our shared environment. Help rewind the future with the Jane Goodall Institute.
Kia ora everyone, tēnā koutou katoa, haere mai welcome. Thank you all for coming. It's such a pleasure to welcome you to Dr. Jane Goodall, Rewind the Future, presented by the Jane Goodall Institute of New Zealand and by my friends at Loop, who've done such a great job organising this and supported very generously by Newstalk ZB and JGINZ Family Wines. What a wonderful occasion this is, and also, can I say, how extraordinarily good it is to be back in here. This is an amazing venue. I know you all know the story. It reopened in February after 8 years, but wow, it's magic. And you deserve it, Christchurch, and you deserve much more than this, but it's fantastic to see it up and running again. The reason we are here tonight is to be in the company of someone truly special. Someone whose two-eyed curiosity, singular determination, and intelligence have informed our collective understanding of the misunderstood and the not understood and the powerless in a way matched by very few people alive. We did not know chimpanzees. We did not know they used tools. Incredibly, we did not know they were omnivores. And we did not know their complex social constructions and interactions. But we do know all of that now and more because almost 6 decades ago, a 26-year-old named Jane Goodall watched and watched and watched and then told the world what she had seen, and the world truly was changed by it. It was revolutionary work, and it was enough for any lifetime. But yet here she is in 2019, aged 85, almost as far from Gombe as you can possibly be, using the respect and acclaim she's earned to make a stand on behalf not only of chimpanzees, but the planet itself. Now, I wrote these notes, and I thought a lot about what I was going to say, and now I'm walking away from my notes because I just want to extemporize a little bit. I was with Jane Goodall in Auckland on Saturday, and I saw how hard she was working in Auckland, school visits, meeting groups, meeting people. She's doing the same in Christchurch. She just doesn't stop. Now, she's 85 years old, and she doesn't stop because she gives a damn so much that she is giving everything she has, her energy and her life to this vocation, to this passion, to this crusade, to this care, to this love, to this concern. She is a truly remarkable woman, and in my life I've been blessed to meet many extraordinary people, but very few who have given as much of themselves as she has. And having watched her now over a week, I find her quite extraordinary. So, We are here tonight to hear from this remarkable woman and also to support the Jane Goodall Institute of New Zealand, or JGINZ. Tonight is a night of hope and a night of celebration, which is a little confusing in some respects because chimpanzee numbers are now so low and their habitat is under such great threat, and they, of course, are not alone. I was reading The Guardian on the plane on the way down about whales that are under threat because the plankton that they require to survive are disappearing because sea temperatures are heating up. What the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change told us is that if we don't restrict global warming, seas will rise catastrophically and will heat catastrophically. Weather extremes will heighten catastrophically. Insects, which are essential for the proper functioning of all ecosystems, will be imperiled catastrophically. And the planet, which has so generously hosted us without ever once sending us a bill, will not be able to sustain us or the many plants and creatures we share it with in ways recognizable to those of us who have lived our lives as if our environmental overdraft facility was infinite. So, where's the hope? Well, the hope, and this is Jane Goodall's crucial message, is in our capacity for action still, and in the capacity for that action to make a difference. And that's what the Jane Goodall Institute here in New Zealand stands for. At JGI, they are on a mission. They're taking action on both global and local sustainability issues, and Jane will talk about the importance of understanding how much impact the local can have, and working towards creating an informed and compassionate critical mass of people who will help create a better world for people, other animals, and our shared environment. Change will happen if we make it. They're focused on sustainable development and protecting biodiversity. They promote sustainability education, increasing our awareness of sustainable living options, of sustainable consumerism, and the power of our compassionate choices. Even how we shop can make a difference. They are inspiring and empowering young people. That's such important work because those of us who are older have failed young people in many respects. And as we saw with the school climate strike last week, and as Greta Thunberg has shown us, young people are leading us. And indeed, JGI's sustainability and citizenship education program, Roots and Shoots, which Jane will talk about, is designed to increase compassionate decision-making, designed to reach into schools, designed to support projects that make a difference, and designed to empower young New Zealanders as change makers. Only last Friday, at a rather joyful occasion with Dame Patsy Reddy at Government House, also attended by Dr. Melanie Vivian, CEO of the Jane Goodall Institute of New Zealand, Dr. Goodall presented two young New Zealanders, Chloe Swarbrook, and a brilliant young college student, Maha Fier, who is joining us tonight, aged 16 years, with the inaugural Jane Goodall Trailblazer Awards, a trailblazer celebrating trailblazers. I want to talk about Melanie Vivian and Neil Gilbert, who was the chair of the JGINZ. Their work is amazing because their work is creating leaders, creating people who are going to live long enough to have as much impact potentially as Jane Goodall has had. So if there are corporate sponsors in the room, you've got a bit of an itchy checkbook, they could do with some support, the JGINZ. Their next step is towards the development of a digital platform for educators, learners, and the general community on sustainable futures. Now, by being here tonight, you are supporting all of that and more. Proceeds from this event and from Auckland and from Wellington and from any merchandise sold go directly to JGINZ. So thank you all for attending. Buying a ticket has made a difference. When Jane Goodall says every individual matters, every individual has a role to play, every individual makes a difference, she is talking about you. Very shortly, we'll hear from Dr. Goodall herself. Her theme, our theme tonight, is rewinding the future. Her theme, our theme tonight, is the capacity we all have to make a change through our actions. She will speak for roughly 40 minutes, give or take. We'll hear from Maha too. And after that, we will have a quick interval, followed by a very special acoustic musical performance from members of Fly My Pretties. Now, those of you who know music, and many of you in this room will know that Fly My Pretties have a changing cast. I think there's been up to 80 members over the decade or more that they have been a band. But tonight we have four of the very best. Age Pryor, Anna Coddington, Mel Parsons, and Barnaby Ware, and they're going to perform some songs. And then after that, Jane and I have a chat on these seats, and she is extraordinary. and there are no off-limit areas, and if you ask her a question, she tells you the truth. Please be sure your cell phones are on silent, although the organisers JGINZ and Dr. Goodall are rather partial to you tweeting out key messages, using the hashtags Jane Goodall and or Rewind the Future, which will unite your messages as they head into the world. Thank you all for coming. It's really wonderful to be here with you, and I hope you have a wonderful and inspirational night in the company of this extraordinary woman. In a moment, we will hear from our guest of honour, but first a reminder, if one was needed, of why we are here tonight.
It's been an amazing journey, this life of mine. This planet has filled me with the wonder of all living things, great and small. We cannot ignore this earth that surrounds us, that feeds us, shelters us, replenishes our bodies and our souls, and stretches our imaginations, where animals, plants, air, water, all care for us. We're all interconnected, people, animals, our environment. When nature suffers, we suffer. And when nature flourishes, we all flourish. I do believe in the possibility of a world where we can live in harmony with nature, but only if every one of us does our part to make that world a reality, so that when you look back over your journey, your life, you can truly say, I did make a difference.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is with great pride that I introduce a woman who really has and is making a difference, Dr. Jane Goodall.
At the top. Well, thank you, John, for an over-the-top introduction. And, you know, when you look back over your life, or when I look back over mine, I think of all the amazing people who've helped me on my journey. And none of us we can't do it on our own. We all need people to support us. And so when I come here to New Zealand, as when I go to the other 35 countries where there are Jane Goodall Institutes, then there are wonderful people who organize things and make sure that everything works. And so I, of course, thank the Jane Goodall Institute in New Zealand. I thank Neil Gilbert, who is the chair of the board of JGI New Zealand, and I thank Melanie Vivian, who's already been mentioned. And then, of course, there's all of you. Thank you for coming tonight. You're helping to make this journey more successful. And I want to thank you, John, for your introduction today. And I also want to thank Mikey and Dan and Scott for organizing this whole tour and making things, I think, helping things to be so successful. But first of all, you gave me a wonderful welcome. So let me give you a welcome in a different language. While I'm here in New Zealand, I'm continually being greeted and welcomed in the local language, which is absolutely right. I don't understand it, of course. But let me... That is the language of greeting you would hear if you came with me to Gombe National Park in Africa, where I've been studying chimps along with my team for nearly 60 years. But I want to start off by asking a question. How did I get to be doing what I'm doing now? Why are so many of you gathered here tonight to hear what I have to say? And I'm still puzzled by how my life has unfolded. So I go back to when I was born in 1934, little girl to a family with very little money, but a lot of love. And I had an amazing mother. I credit so much. The most thanks that I give are to my mother. I was born loving animals. Just people say, what triggered your love of animals? Nothing. I just was born loving animals. And my mother supported this love. A story which I know many of you have heard, but I tell it again and again for a reason. We lived in London when I was a small child, and I still remember Mum taking me for a holiday onto a farm in the country. And in those days, there were no intensive animal farms. It was all animals grazing out in the fields, very different from today. And I can still remember being so excited, seeing the cows and the pigs and the sheep and the horses all out in the fields, meeting them face to face, hens pecking around in the farmyard. But they slept at night in these hen houses to keep them safe from the foxes, and they laid their eggs in the nest boxes around the edge. So my job that I was given was to help collect the hen's eggs. So I'd open the lid of the box, and if there was an egg, I'd pop it in my little basket. Now, I don't remember this. I was 4.5 years old, but apparently I began asking everybody, but where is the hole? Where does the egg come out of the hen? Because I couldn't see a hole like that. And my curiosity wasn't satisfied. What I do remember is seeing a hen. She was a brown hen, and she was going into one of these hen houses. And I must have thought, she's going to lay an egg. So, excitement, I crawl after her. Well, that was a big mistake. And with squawks of presumably fear, she flew out. So again, in that little 4-year-old mind, I must have thought, well, no hen will lay an egg here, but now I'm on the path of discovery. So I went into an empty hen house and waited. And waited. And waited. I was apparently gone for over 4 hours. And remember, I was only 4.5 years old. At any rate, I still remember the hen coming in. She had her back to me. She scuffled around in the straw a bit. She raised slightly up on her legs, and out plopped an egg. And I don't know who was more excited, me or the hen. Buck, 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 buck. By this time, it was getting towards evening, and my mother had actually called the police. They'd been searching for me. They couldn't find me. Nobody thought of looking in a hen house. And yet, although Mum must have been really worried and, frightened, but when she saw this little girl rushing towards the house, she saw the excitement in my eyes, and instead of, how dare you go off, don't you dare do it again, which would have killed that excitement, she sat down to hear the wonderful story of how a hen lays an egg. So the reason I tell that story isn't that the making of a little scientist, curiosity, asking questions, not getting the right answer, deciding to find out for yourself, making a mistake, not giving up, and learning patience. It was all there in that little child. And a different kind of mother might have crushed that early curiosity, and I might not have done what I've done. She continued to support this love of animals. She found books for me about animals. And when I was growing up, all those years ago, there was no television. It hadn't been invented. And so it was books, and more books, and listening to grown-up people. There was a little bit of the radio too, but that didn't really talk about animals. So it was mostly books and being outside and learning from nature, watching the birds, watching the worms, watching the jumping spiders carrying their babies on their backs. All these things were so fascinating to me. And Mum got books about animals for me. She thought I'd probably read more quickly if it was about something that I loved. I was 8 years old when I met Dr. Dolittle. And if there's anybody here who doesn't know Dr. Dolittle, then get the story of Dr. Dolittle. It's been republished, and read it. It's honestly worth reading. Then, when I was 10 years old, by this time World War II is raging. We had virtually no money. My father had joined the army. We'd gone to live with my grandmother, Mum's mother. And I don't think books were published during the war years. I'm pretty sure they weren't. But our books came from the library. And also, I had found a little tiny second-hand bookshop. And I used to spend half of every Saturday there. And as I say, I'm 10 years old, and I have just saved up enough of my few pennies of pocket money to buy this little book that I found. I took it home, I read it from cover to cover. I still have that little book. And it was called Tarzan of the Apes. Well, little girls of 10 can be very romantic. And of course, I fell passionately in love with this glorious lord of the jungle. And what did Tarzan do? He married the wrong Jane. Well, he did, right? Anyhow, that's when my dream began. I knew there wasn't a Tarzan, but I dreamt and I planned, I will grow up, I will go to Africa, I will live with wild animals, and I will write books about them. I didn't have aspirations of being a scientist because girls didn't have those aspirations in those days. In fact, there weren't even any men going out and living in the wild and studying animals back then. But everybody laughed at my dream. Jane, dream about something you can achieve. How will you get to Africa? You don't have money, and you're just a girl. But not my mother. She said, if you really want something like this, you're going to have to work awfully hard and take advantage of opportunity, but don't give up. And that's the message I've taken around the world for young people, particularly in disadvantaged communities. And I wish Mum was alive to hear how many people have come up to me, said to me, written to me, Jane, I want to thank you. You've taught me that because you did it, I can do it too. And so thank you, Mum, for changing the lives of hundreds and thousands of young people by the wise message that you gave me and I've been able to share. Well, I did very well at school, but I couldn't go to university because we didn't have enough money. I had to get a job, I had to get some money. And so there was just enough money to do a boring old secretarial course, shorthand, typing, bookkeeping, the old typewriters where you banged along, nothing modern back then. And I got a job in London. And then came opportunity, a letter from a school friend inviting me to stay for a holiday in Kenya, where her parents had bought a farm. Couldn't save money in London. Went home, worked as a waitress in a hotel around the corner, jolly hard work. But after, 5 or 6 months, I had saved up enough money for a return fare. You couldn't go to Kenya unless you could prove that you could leave. So I had to save up for a return fare. And in those days, it was by boat. There were a few planes, but they were very expensive, way out of range of anybody like me. So it was a boat. And it should have taken slightly under 2 weeks for a boat to go from London through the Suez Canal and to Mombasa in Kenya on the coast. But there was a war with Egypt. I really don't remember why. It doesn't really matter, but the Suez Canal was closed. So the boat went all the way around Cape Town, and it was an amazing journey. It took nearly a month. And I'll never forget that journey, with the air getting warmer and the sea getting bluer, and getting close to Cape Town, and a flying fish and dolphins leaping around the boat. So the first place I set foot in Africa was Cape Town. And of course, Cape Town's very beautiful with the iconic Table Mountain. And Mum had some friends there. They said, Jane can stay with us for the 2 days the boat is, it was in dock. And at first I loved it. It was exciting. But then I noticed on the back of every seat, on the doors into the hotels, all over the place, there was this writing in Afrikaans, slechts blanks. What does it mean? White people only. And suddenly I didn't like Cape Town anymore. It was the height of apartheid. And I hadn't grown up like that. My grandfather was a congregational minister, and we didn't judge people by the color of their skin or their culture or their religion. And so I couldn't wait then to leave Cape Town. When I got to Kenya, it was better. Kenya was just entering independence, and so the whole atmosphere was very different. Stayed with my friend, very exciting. But then somebody said to me, Jane, if you're interested in animals, you should meet Louis Leakey. He spent his life searching for the fossilized remains of early humans, but he was also fascinated by the behavior of modern animals, and he liked comparing their skeletons with the skeletons of the prehistoric beasts that he was digging up in different parts of Africa. And he was curator of the Natural History Museum. So I went to see him. I remember him taking me all around. I remember him asking me so many questions about all the specimens in the museum. And I think he was really impressed that I knew so much, even though I was only just out from England, because I'd read everything I could, and there wasn't that much. I'd spent hours in the Natural History Museum in London when I was working there, and so I could answer most of his questions. And I think that's when he decided that I was the person he'd been looking for to go and study, live with, learn from, not any animal, but the one most like us. We didn't even know back then how close chimpanzees are to us biologically. We didn't know that we differ from them in the structure of DNA by only just over 1%, nor did we know how close we were in the composition of blood, immune system, anatomy of the brain, and so on. Well, it took a year for him to get money. Who on earth was going to give money for this young girl straight from England? They hadn't been to college. What a stupid idea. Finally, a wealthy American businessman said, okay, here's money for 6 months. We'll see what she can do. Second problem, back then, what we call Tanzania today was Tanganyika. It was one of the last outposts of the crumbling British Empire. And the authorities, the British authorities, were absolutely not prepared to take responsibility for this young girl. It was a crazy idea. But in the end, because Leakey never gave up and pestered them, they said, oh, all right, she can come, but she can't come alone. So who volunteered to come with me? That same amazing mother. And you know, for me, it was fantastic. People say, oh, you were so brave. I wasn't brave. I was just doing what I dreamed of doing since I was 10. But for Mum, left in the camp every day with spiders and centipedes and snakes and baboons with their big canine teeth, and a cook that we'd been told we had to take. And it turned out that he very soon found a source of alcohol from fermented bananas. So she was also landed up with a slightly inebriated cook. But what she did for me was absolutely amazing, because in those early days, the chimpanzees ran away from me as soon as they saw me. You know, they're very conservative, and they'd never seen a white ape before. So they just ran away, and the days turned to weeks, and the weeks turned to months. And I knew if I didn't see exciting things before that 6 months' money ran out, that would be the end of the study, and I would have let Louis down. So there was Mum in the evening pointing out to me that I was learning more than I thought. I'd found a peak through my binoculars. She pointed out I was learning about the chimpanzee calls. I was learning about the foods they were eating, because I would go down and collect what they'd been eating. I saw how they made nests in the trees every night, bending over the branches. And I was learning how sometimes they travel alone, sometimes in a small group of females, perhaps with a male, with their dependent young, sometimes a couple of mums with the young all playing together, sometimes a group of males hanging out. And so she pointed out, you know, don't be so depressed, Jane. How sad that she left just 2 weeks before that breakthrough observation, when, as I was walking through the forest, I saw the one chimpanzee who had just begun to lose his fear. It wasn't that close to him, but through my binoculars, I could see him sitting on a termite mound. He knew I was there, but he didn't run. He went on breaking off grass stems and pushing them down into holes in the termite nest and picking off the termites that were clinging on with their jaws. And I saw him break off leafy twigs, and to use them as tools to fish for termites, he had to remove the leaves and the side twigs. So David Greybeard was using and making tools, which would not be exciting if you saw an animal doing that today, because we know there are several animals, including birds, that can use and make tools. But back then, science had decided, in its great wisdom, that humans and only humans used and made tools, and we were defined as man the tool maker. If somebody had bothered to go to the pygmies living out in the rainforest, they could have told you that chimpanzees used and made tools, but of course nobody did that. At any rate, it was that observation which was the turning point in my research, because Leakey could go to the National Geographic Society, and they not only agreed to provide money to continue the research when the money ran out, but they sent a photographer and filmmaker, Hugo van Lauwijk, and he was to document in photographs and film what I was now beginning to discover. Because thanks to David Greybeard, whose calm acceptance of my presence helped to soothe the other chimpanzees. They were ready to run, but if David was there sitting calmly, because he was letting me get closer and closer, they looked from him to me and back, and I suppose they started to think, well, she obviously isn't as frightening as we thought. And so I began to learn about the other chimpanzees in what we now know is a community. At Gombe, the community is about 40 to 50 individuals, made up of adult males, females, adolescents, juveniles, and infants. And so I began to learn about the other chimpanzees. I came to understand their very different personalities and their relationships. I discovered that David's closest friend was the then top-ranking alpha male, Goliath. I got to know the other males, like Mr. Wurzel and Mr. McGregor and Humphrey and all the rest. And I got to know the old matriarch Flo and her family. And so finally, I was able to begin to get to grips with their social behavior. Because I had known from the beginning that unless I could get close, unless they would accept me, unless I could be nearby without them being afraid, I would never really understand why they were doing what they did. And so began one of the most amazing times in my life, this era of discovery. And one of the things that struck me early on is how like us chimpanzees actually are. Take their nonverbal communication, kissing, embracing, holding hands, begging for food, swaggering, shaking the fist, using different objects as tools, using rocks and sticks as weapons. And it was a big shock to find that these chimpanzees, just like us, have a dark and brutal side to their nature. They're even capable of a kind of primitive war. They can kill each other. But they also, like us, have a loving, compassionate, and altruistic side. And it was amazing to watch an adult who was completely unrelated to an infant whose mother had died, adopting that child, and providing the child was more than 3 years independent of the mother's milk, then the adopter would save the child's life. And so it was becoming increasingly clear that there wasn't a sharp line dividing us from them. I'd been out in the field about 2 years, and I got a letter from Louis Leakey. You know, there was we communicated by written letter, or if it was really urgent, telegrams. There was no internet, no laptops, none of that sort of stuff. It was very, very slow way of communicating. So it was quite something when a letter arrived, and this letter came. Louis Leakey saying, Jane, I won't always be around to get money for you. You're going to have to stand on your own 2 feet, and you're going to have to get a degree. And he said, there's no time for you to get a BA. I've got you a place in Cambridge University to do a PhD in ethology. I was the 8th person to be allowed to do a PhD without a preliminary degree. And I didn't even know what ethology was. No Google, couldn't look it up. Of course, it simply means behavior, but scientists like to use these difficult words. I think it makes them feel important. Anyway, I got to Cambridge, and you can probably imagine I was a bit nervous, especially of these erudite professors. Remember, I hadn't been to college at all. So imagine how I felt when many of them told me I'd done my entire study wrong. You shouldn't have given the chimpanzees names. That's not scientific. They should have had numbers. So I would have been talking to you about number 1, number 10, number 15, number 20. Wouldn't mean much to you, would it? And I wouldn't have remembered them anyway. I'm no good with numbers. But then they said, and you can't talk about chimpanzees having personalities. You can't talk about them having minds capable of solving problems, and you certainly can't talk about them having emotions like happiness, sadness, fear, despair, anger, grief, and so on. Why? Because those are unique to us. Well, fortunately, when I was a child, I'd had a wonderful teacher, and that teacher taught me that at least in this respect, these wise professors were completely wrong. Not so wise after all. And that teacher was my dog. You can't share your life with a dog, a cat, a rabbit, a horse, a pig, a bird, and not know. Of course, we're not the only beings on this planet with personalities, minds, and above all, feelings. We are part of the amazing animal kingdom, not separated from it. And yet, in the early 60s, when I was at Cambridge, I was actually taught that the difference between us and other animals was a difference of kind. Thanks to the chimpanzees, because it turned out they're so like us biologically, as well as the information now being filmed by Hugo about their behavior being so like ours, science was eventually forced to start thinking outside that reductionist box. And now, if you're a student, it's a very exciting time. You can study animal personality. You can study animal emotions. And the study of animal intelligence, animal intellect, is absolutely, it's one of the most studied aspects of animal behavior today. So it's a very exciting time for young people who want to go into animal behavior. The most exciting time in my lifetime. Anyhow, we may talk a little more about animal intelligence later when I have the fireside chat with John. But for now, I got my PhD. I had an amazing supervisor, and he taught me how to think in a scientific, logical way, which I love to learn. And he said, if you do this, then you will be less likely to be attacked by scientific colleagues. So I got my PhD, and I went back to Gombe, and I built up a research station, a small one, because Gombe is the smallest national park in Tanzania, and you can't have many people there at a time. And there were students who were studying different aspects of chimpanzee behavior, but most exciting, we were still learning new things about chimpanzees. It's now almost 60 years that this study has continued, the longest unbroken study of any group of wild animals in the world. And so we were, as I say, learning new things every day, but I was also able to spend hours out in the rainforest. And that's where I began to understand the interconnectedness of all living things, the role that every species plays in this amazing tapestry of life, how each little species, no matter how insignificant it seems, has a role to play. And one little species disappearing may lead to the destruction of an entire ecosystem. Because that little species, it might be the food of another species, which in turn, if that disappeared, could be the food of another species. And if you look it up, you'll find several examples of entire ecosystem collapse because one strand of that tapestry has been made extinct. So I was also learning or beginning to feel more and more close to a great spiritual power out in the rainforest. And they were the best days of my life. So why did I leave? Had my PhD, had the students, had money coming in, and I'd written some books. I could have stayed on. I could perhaps still be doing that now. But it all came to an end suddenly, boom, like that. And that was in 1986, and I helped to put together a conference. It was to bring together the scientists who by then were studying chimpanzees in 7 different study sites in different parts of Africa. And the conference was mainly to find out what behavior is so innately chimpanzee that we find it in all these different environments. But which behavior is flexible? Is there something like chimpanzee culture, which we now know there is? I dared talk about this in the mid-60s, and of course I was absolutely shunned by other scientists to talk about culture in a non-human animal. That was a no-no. But we now know, if we take the definition of culture as behavior passed from one generation to the next through observation, imitation, and practice, yes, chimpanzees do have their own primitive culture. And you see the young ones learning the different tool-using behaviors and so on. And this is passed on and becomes part of the culture. We've even seen where an infant actually invents a new tool-using behavior. And if it's adaptive, then others will imitate, and that eventually will become part of the culture. We could do a whole lecture on that. It's absolutely fascinating. But at that conference, we also had a session on behavior in some captive situations, like the cruel training of chimpanzees taken from their mothers and trained to perform in circuses or other sorts of entertainment, chimpanzees taken from their mothers and sold as pets. And we also had a session on chimpanzees and their situation in Africa, how right across Africa where they were being studied, forests were disappearing, chimpanzee numbers were dropping. There was the beginning of the bushmeat trade, and that's the commercial hunting of wild animals for food. Very different from subsistence hunting, where you just kill enough for yourself and your family. And chimpanzee mothers being shot to steal their babies for sale, to the entertainment trade as pets locally, or in those days to medical research. And chimpanzees were being caught in wire snares. They could break the wire, but they couldn't get the noose off hand or ankle, and so would lose the limb or die of gangrene. And also, because they're so like us, they're susceptible to our infectious diseases, and human populations were growing, and Africans were moving ever deeper into chimpanzee habitat with their cattle. They wanted more land for their houses, but they also wanted more land for farming to grow food, to feed their growing numbers. And chimpanzees haven't built up resistance to these diseases. So all of this was happening. And I went to that conference as a scientist, planning to carry on with my wonderful life, and I left as an activist. And so since October 1986, I haven't been anywhere for more than 3 weeks consecutively. And that's only twice a year. And those 3 weeks are getting whittled away, and they're more like 2 weeks now. So it's a bit crazy, isn't it, to be 85 and traveling 300 days a year? But that's how it is. So, okay, I call that conference, it was rather like St. Paul on the road to Damascus. I call it my Damascus moment. I went as a scientist, I left as an activist. I did not make any conscious decision. I was one thing when I went, and I left as another, but I didn't know what to do. So the first thing was, I thought, well, I must find out more for myself. And one of the worst things we saw in that conference was secretly filmed footage of chimpanzees, our closest relatives, in 5-foot by 5-foot laboratory cages, maybe for 30 or 40 years of their 60 possible years of life. And I managed to get into some of those labs, and they were some of the worst experiences I've ever had. And I remember going into this lab where there were 8 adult males, all in their separate little cages, these intensely social creatures. They could no longer groom each other. They couldn't play with each other. They just were there, surrounded by iron bars. And their only interactions with white-coated lab assistants coming in to draw blood or to knock them out for some kind of procedure. And I remember going down on one elbow and looking into the eyes of this chimpanzee. His name was Jojo. He'd been in this little cage for 30 years. And I had a mask on, but looking into his eyes and thinking of the Gombe chimps, there were tears trickling down. And he reached out a finger and gently wiped tears away. And that's when I knew I had to do something. And I won't go into this, there isn't time tonight, but gradually over many, many years, with the help from other organizations, all the chimpanzees from the National Institutes of Health in America, 400 of them, slightly more, they've all been released into sanctuaries. So my fight for this was on ethical grounds. But actually it turned out that after all, although scientists had been absolutely sure they'd be fabulous guinea pigs because they were so like us, when a team went around to all the experiments being done 4 years ago, it turned out not one single one of those experiments was either beneficial or potentially beneficial to human health. And that was a team put together by the National Institutes of Health, not by us. Well, so that was one part of it. But then what about Africa? Managed to get a little bit of money together, was able to visit 7 different chimpanzee range countries, learned a lot about the plight facing the chimpanzees. I remember going into an African market in Congo and seeing a little infant. He was about 1.5 years old. His mother had been killed. He was curled up on top of a tiny wire cage to which he was tied by a chain around his waist. And his eyes were glazed over. It looked as though he'd lost hope. And I went up to him, made the tiny close-up sound of chimpanzee greeting. And this little being sat up and reached out towards me. So fortunately, with the help of the American ambassador at that time in Congo, we were able to approach the Minister of Environment. And because it was illegal to sell the chimps, only nobody bothered, we were able to confiscate him, and that led to the Jane Goodall Institute sanctuaries. There are a number of sanctuaries for orphan chimpanzees and gorillas and other animals in Africa today. Well, as I was learning more and more about the plight of the chimpanzees, I was also learning about the plight of so many people living in and around chimpanzee habitat, the crippling poverty, the lack of good health and education facilities, the degradation of the environment, the struggle for survival. And it came to a head when I flew over that tiny Gombe National Park. And when I began in 1960, and even in 1970, if you flew over, you saw it was part of an almost unbroken belt of forest right across equatorial Africa to the West African coast. When I flew over in 1990, it was a tiny island of forest surrounded by completely bare hills, and the land was over-farmed and infertile. Trees were cut down on the very steep slopes by people desperate to get some more fertile land to grow food to feed their families or to make charcoal. Terrible soil erosion, the little streams getting silted up, people struggling to survive. And that's when it hit me, if we don't do something to help these people, then there's no way we can even try to save the chimpanzees. And so the Jane Goodall Institute began a program called Take Care Otukari. It's a community-based conservation program, but started with not a group of arrogant white people marching into an African village and telling the villagers what to do, but a small team of 7 carefully picked local Tanzanians going into the villages, listening, asking them what they thought we could do to make their lives better. And that started a very holistic program, which we called Take Care or Takari. Again, there's no time to go into it now, but it gradually enlarged. I think the most important intervention was microcredit programs so that women could take out tiny loans for environmentally sustainable projects, and getting scholarships to keep girls in school during and after puberty, because it had been found that as women's education improves, family size tends to drop. And we also do workshops to teach the local people about family planning, and they are the ones who take it to the villages where it is very well received. Cultures change. And so that program has been so successful. It began in 12 villages around Gombe. It's now in 104 villages throughout the whole of the chimp range in Tanzania. The people have become our partners in conservation. And that program is now introduced in similar form in 6 other African countries around chimpanzee habitat. And everywhere, chimpanzees and forests are surviving because the people understand that protecting the environment isn't just to save wildlife, it's for their own future, that they need what's called the services of the forests, and they need to protect the environment for their own future. So this has been amazingly, successful, but I was, by this time, traveling further and further around the world, talking about the problems, raising money, but mainly raising awareness. And I was learning far more than I wanted to know about what we are doing to this planet. So we talked about similarities between us and chimpanzees, but we're different. And I believe the most significant difference is the explosive development of our intellect, probably in part anyway, triggered by the fact that at some point we developed a spoken language so we can teach our children about things that aren't present. We can learn from the distant past by talking about it. We can make plans for the future. And perhaps most significant of all, we can bring together people with different knowledge sets to discuss problems and try to find solutions. So, yes, we know other animals are amazingly more intelligent than anybody used to think, but none of them can match up to a creature, us, who have sent a rocket up to Mars. A little robot crept off, took photographs. We've seen the photographs of the red planet where once it was thought that maybe human life could survive there. But we've seen the photographs. I don't think any of us who've seen those photographs want to try and live on Mars. And so how is it possible that this most intellectual creature that's ever walked the planet is destroying its only home? And you all know what I mean. You know about the pollution of land and air and water. You know about the fact that we're growing food with chemical poisons that, along with industrial waste and household waste, is being washed down into the rivers, washed out into the sea. We're now having areas of the ocean that have become acidified, and the oceans are one of the great lungs of the world, absorbing carbon dioxide and breathing out oxygen. And as they become acidified, they can no longer perform that service for us. The other great lungs are the forests. And as they are destroyed, this carbon dioxide is released into the atmosphere, and they no longer are capable of absorbing CO2 to the extent they used to be, because they're no longer there. We're destroying our tropical forests and all our forests at a terribly alarming rate. And so how is it possible that we're doing all of this? We're recklessly burning fossil fuels, carbon dioxide rising up into the atmosphere, creating, in part, these greenhouse gases that act as a sort of blanket around the globe, trapping the heat of the sun. leading to the climate crisis. And I hope there's nobody in this large space who's a climate change denier, because I tell you, I've been around the planet. I've stood in Greenland. I've been with Inuit elders, and this was the end of winter, and they said even in the height of summer, the ice never used to melt. But there was the water pouring out of the ice. Here were the icebergs breaking off, floating away in the ocean. And it happened that I went straight from Greenland to Panama, where already people had had to leave their island homes because if there was a storm, they were no longer habitable because ice cliffs melting and the glaciers on the mountains melting, ocean levels rising also because they are heating up as the climate changes and as the waters heat up, so they expand. Everywhere I go, weather patterns have changed. Everybody tells me. It used to be like this when I was a child. It used to be hot at this time of year, now it's cold. It used to be dry and now it's wet. We never know whether it's going to be dry or wet. Gombe, when I first went in 1960, there was a short rains, then there was a gap, and then there was a long rains. You could set your calendar by it. But now there's no short and long rains. There's a rainy season, which is, you never quite know if it's going to rain or not. And of course, this is affecting the pattern of the flowering of different plants. This is happening all over the world. Everywhere we're losing biodiversity, and that's partly because of the way we're harming the planet, but also climate change is playing a major role, and it will become an increasingly major role if we don't do something about it. So it's very good there are these climate marches started by Greta Thunberg from Sweden. I bet all of you can think of other ways that we're harming the planet. So how is it possible, as I asked before, that this intelligent species is harming the planet as much as it is, as we lose biodiversity, as we change the weather patterns? It seems that there has been a disconnect between this clever brain and the human heart, love and compassion. And only when head and heart work in harmony, I truly believe, can we achieve our true human potential. But traveling around the world, is it surprising? I was meeting young people who seemed to have lost hope, young people who were angry and sometimes violent, young people who were deeply depressed, mostly young people who were just apathetic and didn't seem to care. And I said to them in all these different countries, why do you feel this way? And they all said more or less the same. We feel like this because you have harmed our future, and there's nothing we can do about it. There's a saying, we haven't inherited this planet from our parents, we've borrowed it from our children, but we have not been borrowing our children's future, we have been stealing it, and we're still stealing it today. But was it true when the young people said, there's nothing we can do about it? I'm convinced, and luckily there is some science backing this up, that there's a window of time. It's not a very big window, I think, and it's closing all the time, but a window in which if we get together, and if we get together now, we can start healing some of the harm that we've inflicted and starting to at least slow down climate change. So it was in 1991 that I began this program for young people called Roots and Shoots. And right from the beginning, with a small group of Tanzanian students who came to talk with me because they were concerned about what was going on around them, we decided that the main message of Roots and Shoots would be every single one of us matters, every single one of us has some role to play, and every single one of us makes an impact on the planet every single day. And we decided that because of the interrelationship of all living things, each group of Roots and Shoots would choose 3 projects. They would choose, we wouldn't dictate. And the projects they choose would be 3, one to help animals, one to help people, want to help the environment. And of course, what they chose would differ depending on how old they are. It started with high school students. It now has a few preschoolers, lots of kindergarten, university, everything in between, even some adult groups. And so it's now in just over 60 countries and growing all the time. And I can tell you, as I'm traveling around the world, that these young people are truly making a difference. I've been with groups of Roots and Shoots here in New Zealand, and I was just in Australia, and what they're doing is amazing. They are changing the world. And we have a young person with us today, Maha, and she is a remarkable young person, age 16, and she's going to come out and just give you her perspective so that you see that here in New Zealand there is a reason for hope in your young people. So Maha, can you emerge from wherever you are? If you wish.
Kia ora, everyone. This is a mind-blowing experience to be speaking to you alongside one of the most influential people this world has ever seen, and someone who has been one of my biggest inspirations. If you had told me I would be given this opportunity a month ago, I would have never, ever believed you. For my 12th birthday, I attended a Jane Goodall lecture. I didn't quite understand who I was going to be listening to, but I remember being surprised by how captivated and interested I was in what this woman was saying. It was like the introduction to a reality which I only thought existed in films, an introduction to the world of conservation and defying the stereotypes placed against you, and to a woman who cared deeply about the state of our planet and how we as humanity treated animals and the environment around us. My 12th birthday back in 2014 became a day which really awakened me to the possibilities of the things I could achieve in my life. And it also awakened me to the undeniable need of more people opening up the conversation about how we currently treat our natural world and pushing to nurture our planet instead of exploiting it. I'm now 16 years old and I live in the Kapiti Coast, and you may have heard of it if you've ever eaten our Kapiti ice creams. And I attend Paraparaumu College. Within Paraparaumu College, I help lead my college's Societal, Environmental, and Animal Rights Action Group, also known as SEER, where all of the amazing students involved with SEER, over 100, focus on volunteering and campaigning to help the people within the world, the environment around us, and the wildlife we share our planet with. What's incredible about SEER is that we are able to cover this wide range of different issues occurring on our Earth at the moment. So when someone asks me what I think the biggest issue is happening currently, I'm always a little bit stumped by the question. I could say global poverty, but the areas which lack access to food and to water are the areas which actually lack access to water and clean houses and things like that. I could say mental health, as it's one of the biggest issues young people currently face in Aotearoa today. But people tell us that the way to improve our state of mind, to relieve stress and to relieve anxiety, is by going outside, breathing in the fresh air, going to the beach with a friend. Those are some of the solutions placed in front of us, and we may have access to those things now, but what about in the future? What about when our world is truly at its final tipping point like it is now, and people's lives are destroyed, animals are suffocating, and our land is on fire? Where will the fresh air be then? We have come to this moment in time where our planet has been placed under pressure to sustain many things. The fabric of life relies on our planet's sustainability. As humans live off the land and animals, animals depend on the land and other species of animals to survive, and our own planet, as in the land we stand on, the air we breathe, and the plants we eat depends on the processes of the food chain and the life of an animal to continue to thrive. We all intertwine with each other in this circle of life. One aspect of our planet cannot sustain itself without the other. The earth is bigger than just an individual lost in our own minds and thoughts, as well as the city walls, so we forget about everything else our world has to offer. When we drink and eat, we must say thank you to Mother Earth. When we breathe, we must say thank you to Mother Earth. When we go outside, swim, run, have a picnic, we must say thank you to Mother Earth. Everything we do relies on the state of our planet, and if that's a fact, then why do we remain hesitant to make the big sustainable changes that are needed for our planet as we ignore what seems to be the beginning of the end? It seems absurd to me that we are still having some sort of argument of what we can and can't do to solve issues like climate change, ocean pollution, and biodiversity loss. Call for a plastic ban nationwide. No, that's too radical. Call for a country diet change where we all go more plant-based. No, sorry, burgers are actually a part of our genetic makeup, so we can't do that. There's all these excuses that are placed in front of us, but what society seems to be struggling with is looking forward. It's my future, it's my friend's future, it's my child's future, and well, it's your future too. Everybody seems to want to live this fantasized dream of a big fancy house and an expensive car and owning the high-end fashion that's actually polluting our planet. But why can't our concept of luxurious living and being normal involve a concept of sustainable living? Jane Goodall, you are definitely one of the most inspiring people on this planet. But do you know who also inspires me? The rangatahi out there who will stop at nothing until our future is safe and secured. Young people who are currently fighting for the rights of themselves and our planet. There are so many talented, clever young people here in our community. Parapara Umu College has a robotics group that is currently inventing a beach cleaning robot to go out on highly contaminated beaches and clean up all that litter, and that is just one example of many which proves how innovative young people are. So when decision makers, businesses, our families talk about making sustainable changes and really truly solving environmental issues, it calls for humans to break the mindset that we will lose too much in this world if we decide to change our ways, but reminding people and continuously reminding them that we will lose too much if we actually don't. So why protect the people, the animals, and the environment around us? Well, that's simple. This is all our home, and we are all needed if we are going to save our home from the dangers it's facing. Ngā mihi nui, and thank you so much for listening to me.
So I hope that's given you a feeling of why the young people are one of my greatest reasons for hope. Let's not try and get out of the fact that we're in very dark times, environmentally, socially, and politically. These are dark times. And if we lose hope, then we may as well give up. Because if you lose hope, you become apathetic. If our young people lose hope, it's even worse. And that's why most of my energy is now devoted into growing this program for young people, involving students like Maha, and doing this further and further around the world. So I think right now there's about 150,000 groups of Roots and Shoots, and there are many people who've been through the program. I call them the alumni, and such is the solidarity that the young people feel, because we're growing a family around the world, that they keep the values that they acquired in Roots and Shoots into adult life. The ministers of environment in Tanzania and in DRC were in Roots and Shoots. When I go to China, people come up and say, well, of course I care about the environment. I was in Roots and Shoots in primary school. And so this is my greatest reason for hope. But let's not make bones about it. We have a long way to go. We've got to solve the issue of poverty, because one of the ways in which we as individuals can make a difference is to think about the choices we make in our daily lives. What do we buy? What do we eat? What do we wear? How was it made? Did it harm the environment? Did it lead to animal suffering? Is it cheap because of child slave labor or sweatshops? If you're really poor, you cannot make those decisions. You cut down the last forest in your desperate effort to stay alive. Or in an urban area, you buy the cheapest food because you have to stay alive. So we need to address poverty, but we need to also address the unsustainable lifestyles of everybody else. And I leave you to think about your lifestyle and how unsustainable or sustainable it actually is. We also have to think about a topic that's seldom talked about. It's thought by many people to be politically incorrect, but human population growth. So we live on a planet with finite natural resources. And yet there is this fallacy, which is proposed by governments and by economists, that we can have unlimited economic growth on a planet with finite natural resources where the human population is continually growing. Does that make sense? Doesn't make sense to me. We have to think about this. What we can do, I don't know. We do what we can with our family planning information and improving the education of women. But we also have to do something about corruption, don't we? And we also have to do something about an issue which must be very close to your hearts here in Christchurch: hatred. The hatred that is growing up between people of different religions. And I'm part of the international, I can't remember what it's called now, but all the different religions, you know? And, well, I just don't remember its name. But it's quite a large group. And all the major religions, all of them, they all have the same golden rule: do to others as you would have them do to you. It's not any religion that's bad, it's the fanatics who take parts of that religion and they spew out hatred. That's something which Roots and Shoots is trying to address, because we try to bring together young people from different nations, from different cultures, from different religions, and gradually they come to understand, well, actually, these people may look different, they may have different colored skin, they may wear different clothes, they may have a different religion, but if we fall and cut ourselves, the blood is the same. If we weep, our tears are the same. If something makes us laugh, our laughter is the same. We actually are one family. Oh, we've got a long way to go, but we need to think about the problems so that we can bring our intellects together and try to solve them. And Roots and Shoots is very much part of that. So it's my greatest reason for hope, the young people who are rolling up their sleeves and getting out and taking action. Next reason for hope is this brain, and we are coming up with all kinds of innovative technologies to enable us to live in better harmony with Mother Nature and to make lighter ecological footprints in our own lives. And then there's the resilience of nature. I talked about the bare hills around Gombe. I talked about working with the people till they became our partners. I talked about them understanding that they need the natural environment for their own future. They have left land aside to form a buffer around Gombe. The forest has come back. But around all the villages, throughout this whole area, the trees are coming back. You fly over, you won't see bare hills anymore. And areas that are being completely destroyed can be given another chance. Many examples here in New Zealand. Animals on the brink of extinction can be given another chance. And again, you've got many amazing examples in New Zealand. My favorite is the black robin, which was down to one fertile female and one, I think there were two fertile males, but she took one of them as her husband. She dumped her original husband who was infertile. And anyway, from those two individuals, there are now about 500. And it was one of my great heroes, Don Merton, who did this, who made this project work. And there's hundreds of other projects like that. So there we are. We have this resilience of nature. And then we have social media used in the right way. For the first time in human history, we can bring together voices from around the planet to stand up together in solidarity, even if they're miles apart. And then finally, there's the indomitable human spirit. And that's why I carry Mr. H. And Mr. H was given to me 29 years ago. He was given to me by a man called Gary Horn, which is why he's Mr. H. And Gary went blind when he was 21, decided to be a magician, was told it was impossible if he was blind. And he does shows for children. They don't realize he's blind. And at the end, he'll tell them and say, things may go wrong in your life. You never know, but don't give up. There's always a way forward. He does scuba diving, skydiving. He's taught himself to paint. So if you get his little book, Blind Artist, you can get it on Amazon. And in that book, which is a very small little book, there's a portrait of Mr. H that he gave me all those years ago. He's never seen him, but he's felt him. And you'll be amazed to see the portrait of Mr. H in that book. Those icons like Nelson Mandela, he came out of 27 years in prison, and he had the amazing ability to forgive, so that with de Klerk, they were able to help South Africa leave behind that evil regime of apartheid, so that now I can go to Cape Town and enjoy the beauty. And if you look around you, if you talk to people, you'll find out there's so many people leading seemingly ordinary lives, but having this indomitable spirit, overcoming physical or social difficulties. And you know something? Every single person in this big space, we all have that same indomitable spirit. But some people don't realize it. They don't nurture it. They don't let it grow. They don't let it move out into the world to inspire others. So later on, just before we part this evening, you'll see a video which shows it's not only humans who have that indomitable spirit. So that's the end of my message now. We'll talk about cow and some other amazing creatures when I have my fireside chat with John. And Kiwi is here just because, well, you're all Kiwis, right? So thank you, and I'll see you all again presently.
Gosh, it's nice to be with you.
It's lovely to be with you.
You're fantastic, aren't you? I'm right.
He's impossible.
No. Well, we're only here the once, right? And that's your point. We're going to do a little bit of a slideshow tonight, and I'm going to start with.
That's me at 18 months, and I'm with Jubilee. Jubilee was a toy made when the first chimpanzee was born in London Zoo. It was given to me by my father. Everybody said, you can't give a child that age this monstrous creature, she'll have nightmares. But of course, he was my favorite toy.
And Jubilee was in the London Zoo, right?
He was first baby born in the London Zoo, and it was the Jubilee year of Queen Mary and whatever king it was, Jubilee year. So just a few were made by that very high-end toy company, Hamleys.
And so the thing about Jubilee was, there you are falling in love with the chimpanzee.
Yeah, but that's what everybody thinks. I mean, I did fall in love with him as a toy. I took him everywhere. But people think that's what triggered my love of chimpanzees. And that's why I studied them, which is totally, totally, totally not true. I went to Africa, I would have been prepared to study a field mouse as long as I could be out in the wild. And it was Leakey who suggested chimpanzees. I couldn't have dreamt of anything as exotic as a chimpanzee.
I want to come back to Gombe, but I want to talk about, so what sort of life would Jubilee have had? Concrete enclosure, bars, tea parties, that kind of nonsense?
Terrible, horrible. Back then, you know, the chimpanzees were treated really badly. The tea party looked sweet, but they had shock collars under their clothes. They had tiny little cement-floored bars to live in, and Jubilee didn't live very long. He died.
And I remember, and I think probably people my age and older and who were here tonight will remember chimpanzee tea parties. I remember them from my childhood at Wellington Zoo. And so this terrible attitude towards these creatures, which are the most like us of all animals, was what you encountered when you went to Cambridge. The idea that why on earth would you give them names? How on earth could you regard them as having personalities? How had we got it so extraordinarily wrong?
Well, you know, I think it was only science and people doing nasty things to animals. I don't think an ordinary person living back then who had a dog or a cat, I mean, they would have, I mean, you too, you would have thought your dog, I mean, did you have a dog as a child?
Yeah, I do, and I have a dog now.
But you knew your dog had a personality.
Absolutely.
You knew your dog could feel happy or sad. Ordinary people did. It was just science didn't know how to prove it. And I don't honestly think those scientists who told me that animals didn't have personalities, minds, and emotions, I don't think they believed it. Do you think Trump believes that there isn't such a thing as climate change?
I don't know what he believes. I don't, yeah.
Same sort of thing.
Yes.
Different reason, but same sort of thing.
The other thing, and I know this is very dear to your heart, and you want to talk about it, is the intelligence of animals.
Yes, I do. I really, really do. As you know, when you're limited to a certain time up on the podium, and so the creatures I brought here, first of all, this is Ratty. Anybody know Wind in the Willows? Ratty. But this one is representing a giant forest rat from Africa. And like ordinary rats, they have an amazing sense of smell. And they've been taught to sniff up the explosive component. It's called TNT in a landmine. So in many parts of Africa, landmines are left after a civil war, and it's usually women and children who get their foot blown off when they're working in the fields. These guys sniff out the landmine, and people can come along and defuse it. And they're also taught to sniff out ivory and pangolin scales and rhino horn, and they have an advantage over dogs because they can climb up the crates and up to the top. And so people who used to hate rats in Africa now love them. And then Piglet, of course, is Winnie the Pooh. You have to know Winnie the Pooh. But Piglet is to illustrate that pigs have as much intelligence as dogs, and more intelligent than many. And I want everybody here, after this, to Google, not Picasso the artist, but Pigcasso, and see what you will see, and you will love it. We won't talk about it now, but don't forget, Pigcasso. And you know, these guys turn into pork and sausages. So when I get people to look at Picasso, they say, oh, I wish you'd never done that. I can't eat bacon again. And I say, well, why do you think I showed you? This is imaginatively named Cow. Yeah, Cow. She was given to me by a child, and I was going to give her away. And I thought, no, Cow couldn't help me. So when I'm talking about the fact that more and more people around the world are eating more and more meat, Cow is helping me. She's my little prop. And first of all, as more and more people eat more and more meat, billions of animals are kept in these utterly horrendous conditions in the factory farms. And I once compared it to the Auschwitz and the concentration camps in World War II, and I was roundly criticized for trying to compare Jewish people with animals. And of course I wasn't. I was just saying the conditions when you know the animals are sentient beings. And then fortunately, one of the Holocaust survivors wrote a book about factory farms called Eternal Treblinka. So I can just refer to him and his book. But, you know, some people don't care about the cruelty. Some people don't believe cows have personalities and close bonds with their calves, which they have if they're allowed to. But to feed them, huge areas of environment are cleared to grow the grain. Lots of fossil fuel is used to get the grain to the animals, to the abattoirs, to the table. Huge amounts of water are used to get change the vegetable protein to animal protein. And then in addition, these animals, whether they're cows or pigs or chickens or whatever, they produce gas during digestion. So do you, so do I. I mean, we all do. And we don't want any demonstrations here, please. Not a single one, not one person. If you feel like demonstrating, please leave the room. Anyway, that's methane. And methane is an even more virulent greenhouse gas than CO2. So cow helps me talk about these issues to people. But, you know, also cows, there's a really heart-rending video of a calf dragged away from the mother to go to slaughter, and the mother bellowing in anguish, chasing after until she collapses.
And there'll be people in this room familiar with that scene. And this is a complex discussion for New Zealanders to have.
Yes.
Because our economy is built on the back of cow.
I know it.
Thank you, cow.
I know it.
And so dairy farming,
Yeah.
and dairy farming requires the removal of the bobby calves from the cow so that we can have the milk.
That's right.
So how do we get the balancing act right, which is when there is so much invested, when an economy is based on cow, and yet there is increasing evidence that the way we are farming is either cruel, methane producing, or it requires disproportionately greater resources than other forms of food production. How do we respond to that?
Well, you know, it's a very strange thing, but vegetarianism is growing around the world, and so is veganism. And so, but at the same time, you know, earlier I talked about helping the people around Gombe to find alternative ways of living than destroying the forest. So if we accept that too much dairy farming and too much meat eating is harming the environment, then what must we do? We must help the farmers find alternative ways of living. And one way that was suggested to me was growing hemp. Hemp makes the most... Hemp makes the most amazing bricks for building. Hemp makes amazing clothes. I've got socks made from hemp. It's an extraordinary, the farmers could grow that and make a really wonderful living that was, you know, the hemp will also absorb CO2 while it's growing. So this is, what have we got these intellects for, if not to try and solve some of these difficult problems that they're all around us? And what I find so worrying is that so often you find a solution to one problem, and then that leads to another problem you never even thought about. So we have to try and solve that too. And I think the main thing to realize is the world isn't black and white. It's not black and white. Is it?
No, it's not. I just agreed, obviously, because who wouldn't? When Jane Goodall states a proposition, you just say, yes, I just want to look at this photo.
That is one of my most favorite photos ever, obviously taken by Hugo. It was sent out by the Geographic. The little infant is Flint. He's just learned to walk. He's about 5 months old. And his mother, Flo, has trusted me enough to let her precious baby come and reach out like that. And, you know, it reminds me of Angelo's famous God reaching out to man. And it's like man reaching out to the other animals. I just love this picture.
Where was Flo when that was? Where was Flo? Was
Flo was just behind.
Just so she was watching.
Yes, she was right there. She's almost in the picture, but just isn't.
And so she did trust you, didn't she?
Yes. She was a little bit worried, but she trusted me.
And as you were talking about Flo then, and as you were talking about David Greybeard before, trusting you, physically, their strength is exponentially greater than ours. And yet, you had to earn their trust. And for a long time, that story you told was a striking story. You were running out of money, your mum had gone home, months had passed before David finally came close, or let you come close.
Let me come close, yes. But, you know, thank goodness I saw him fishing for termites, because that was the turning point. Yeah. Once I knew money was coming in and I wasn't letting Lewis Leakey down, then I sort of relaxed, and gradually I got closer and closer until I could sit among them, and they didn't fear me anymore, and they just carried on with their behavior.
I just want, because can you guys see, Dr. Goodall, you guys there at the, you can't really. Shall I try and move this lectern?
Yes.
I failed woodwork at school, Wellington College, which is why I always got on very poorly with Jerry Brownlee. And, but...
Hello. Thank you, that's a brilliant thing to do. It's it's the sort of thing I do. Yeah.
There had only ever been one concerted attempt to study chimps in the wild, and that scientist had a trail of 22 porters.
Yes.
Brilliant.
Can you imagine? Of course, he saw one chimp, and for some reason an infant was kind of fairly near, and a male came and snatched the infants up and went away. That's all he saw in 3 months. That one example, that one sighting. But I think the even more weird one was a man way before that, 1800 and something, and for some reason he was interested in chimps. So he found a fruiting tree, and he was scared of them, so he put a cage, and for some bizarre reason he thought it would be, the chimps would accept him better if he was naked. So, and then he smeared himself with baboon dung. I mean, well, he didn't see any chimps. I think they were terrified. Crazy man.
So when you had the audacity to observe, when you had the audacity to describe personalities, when you had the audacity to name, when you had the extraordinary audacity to tell us we weren't alone in our magnificence as tool makers, as tool users, and you turned up at Cambridge, and these dons, an age prior from Fly My Pretty, said, ask her, how did they react? How did they react? And it's such a great question. What were they like? Were they condescending? Were they suspicious? Were they dismissive? What were they like at first?
You mean the professors?
Yeah.
I think they were a bit angry.
Because you showed them up?
They didn't know what to do with me, because I was different. So, you know, I mean, I was so lucky to have a really wonderful supervisor. And he was one of the very top ethologists in Europe at the time. And ethology began in Europe with Konrad Lorenz. And he was my very sternest critic, but then he came to Gombe. And he wrote to me afterwards, he said, in those 2 weeks I learned more about animal behavior than all the rest of my life put together. And so he was the one who taught me to think and write in a scientific way, so that I could write what I believed to be true in such a way that other scientists couldn't attack me. I really owe him so much, Robert Hind.
I'm going to change the photo. I'm hoping I'm going to change the photo. We've got the time up at the moment. Look, it's up there. Look at that. You talked about your mum before.
Yes, there's Mum and my sister Judy, 4 years younger than me, born on the same day. And my father, well, I never really knew him. You know, he went off to the war, joined the army, see him in his uniform, and I was just about 5 years old. And then I never really saw him. He came back on leave once or twice. Then my parents divorced. So I got to know him later, met him in London. He was very proud of me.
I bet he was.
Yeah, he was.
You know the way you talk about roots and shoots. You know the way, your delight. I was watching you watch Maha when she was talking before, and your belief in young people, and your absolute ability to enable them to be better than we have been in many respects. Do you think that's something you learned from your mum?
Well, certainly. I mean, she taught me that just because I never, not even for a second did I think as a child that I couldn't do something just because I was a girl. Other people told me it, but I didn't believe it because Mum didn't believe it. And her mother, too, was one of these pioneers, but we weren't sort of strident or anything. It was just very quiet that, yeah, you can do it if you want to, and don't give up.
You said in Reason for Hope, A Spiritual Journey, always I have this feeling, which may not be true at all, that I am being used as a messenger.
Yes.
Are you?
Well, it does seem so. It does seem when I look back over my life that there were certain choices, certain points on my path where I could choose to do this or that. And I think I chose the right. And now it seems, I'm literally like on a treadmill. I can't get off. And because, if I came and talked to an audience like this and nobody really cared, then I wouldn't go on doing it. But people do, and people come up to me after a talk and say, I promise you I'd given up, but I'm going to do my bit. And then, inspiring young people to really go out there and be the strong next generation. So I know that what I'm doing is worthwhile. And I could sit back and do it on television and send out television messages. But people tell me again and again, Jane, I watched your films, I watched your video conference, but it's different when I see you in person and you're here in person. Again and again people tell me that.
So how many days did you travel last year? 300?
I think more. And this year's worse. And there's two people who work out my schedule, and of course they check with me. And then we've got, Jane has a whole week off, and then an opportunity comes along. And they say, Jane, you really shouldn't do that. And I say, but, there's all those young people, and I have to. I'm caught. I told you it's a treadmill.
And I was talking to you before, and I think you're going home, back to the UK after this, right? Back to England. I think you've got a full 5 days off, and then you're going to the States, right?
Whole 5 days, yes.
Yeah.
Then all over North America, US and Canada.
And I wanted, in that moment as you're telling me that, to ask you, to beg you to rest, but I know you're not going to. You're not going to, are you?
No.
You're just going. And so, and so, you must be exhausted, but also your eyes are sparkling now.
Mm.
So.
Well, that's because I'm looking at you.
Well, the feeling's mutual. But when you sense that people are listening, when you sense that you are galvanizing a room, when you sense you are making a difference, is that still a fantastic thing?
Is it still fantastic?
Yeah.
To be honest, I honestly do not understand how I've come to be who I am. I want somebody to study it. Because, I really do, because I don't understand why I'm who I am. I don't understand how I've become this icon, because I don't feel like it at all. I'm just me.
Yeah, he was right. This is a great cartoon.
Well, I love it. I absolutely love it. And do you know what was so bizarre? When this cartoon came out, I was in Gombe, so I didn't know. But at that time, the Jane Goodall Institute in the US was, and the person at the head of it was a woman. And can you believe it? She got a lawyer to write to Gary Larson and say that we're thinking of suing you because your cartoon is implying that Jane Goodall has sexual relationships with the chimpanzees. And if you can't have a sense of humor, can you possibly imagine that's what Gary Larson is trying to imply? Of course he's not. For one thing, the chimps couldn't care less about a human female.
What he's reflecting on is the extraordinary, against all odds fact of how close you came, right? That's what I think that cartoon's about.
Yeah, well, yeah. I have to tell you, I'll share this secret with everybody. I have never been sexually attracted to a male chimpanzee. Male humans are different.
That's a very fine thing.
See, there's Mr. H. He's in so many pictures. He's very famous.
Everything is connected. This is a quote from the Jane Goodall Institute, but it's you. Everyone can make a difference. Quote, people say think globally, act locally. Well, if you think globally, it's overwhelming, and you do not have enough energy left to act locally. Just act locally and see what a difference you can make. And that's the message you're giving these children, right?
Yep.
Think locally, act locally. Small actions.
Yes. Because honestly, I made that quote because so many people get depressed when they think globally. Because it is depressing. But if you think of the world as like a jigsaw, I like to think of it as like a jigsaw with millions of little tiny pieces. And everywhere we've harmed Mother Nature, which is all around the globe, the little pieces of the jigsaw are black. But so you take one little black piece that you're passionate about, like a dirty stream or a littered beach or whatever it is, and work at it with your group, and then gradually it will turn green. And so as more and more people around the globe tackle little jigsaws locally, more and more places become green, and that's where we find hope.
It's such a simple message, isn't it? But it also helps us overcome a kind of fatalism, a kind of sense that we can't do anything. And sometimes when we talk about carbon emissions or emission trading schemes, or when we talk about making an effort in New Zealand, we say, we needn't bother because China, we needn't bother because India, we needn't bother because Trump. And yet that logic, which is think locally, act locally, it transcends that, doesn't it? Transcends that kind of fatalism, that kind of apathy, that kind of pessimism.
Yes, I mean, and I actually get a bit upset. I know what China is doing now. It's harming a lot of Africa and other parts of the world. But China is only doing what in Europe we did. What did we do with colonialism? We wanted to build up our own countries. We'd used up our own resources. We went and we took the minerals, we took the gold, we took the timber, we took whatever we could, including humans as slaves. And big companies do the same today. China is only doing what we did, but they're bigger and they're very smart. And so they're causing even more harm because we have already taken so much.
And so if people are sitting in the room tonight, inspired by you, and everyone will be, what you're saying is you can do very simple things, very local things, conscious consumerism, right? Think about what you're buying.
Yeah.
There are small things that you can do that if we all do them, will make profound change.
Yeah, that's right. So if you think about what you buy, and what consequences that will have for future generations. And that's why I say, in order for this to really change business, and it already is changing business, but if we want real change, we must alleviate poverty so that the poor people too can afford to make ethical choices, which right now they can't.
No. And so the sorts of ethical choices we might make around conscious consumerism, for example, if we're still eating meat, buying a free-range or organic chicken or whatever, is not something you can do when you are living on the minimum wage and struggling to pay rent in our major cities, right?
That's right.
So in fact, solving the issue of poverty and inequality will also help us solve the issue of ecology.
Yes, it will. It will. And population growth, we have to consider that. We can't just ignore it. And so when none of the big conservation organizations, I'm going back to the 70s, you can't talk about, well, they've talked then about population control, which was a silly way to talk about it anyway. But you mustn't talk about it because it's politically sensitive and blah, 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 blah. So I invented a way of talking about it because I knew I had to. It was voluntary population optimization. Right? If you work that out, it's voluntary. I'm not imposing it on you. And it's optimizing the population where you live so that you can actually not have more people living there than the land or your finances or whatever can support.
But many of our orthodoxies, many of our assessments of economies, GDP growth, are based upon an untruth. And you addressed this when you spoke beautifully before. The untruth is that we can keep growing. And we can keep growing on a planet with finite and increasingly exhausted resources. And as you said before, that's clearly a logical and rational fallacy.
Completely illogical.
Yeah, I mean, they're mutually exclusive. You can't keep growing when resources are finite.
Pope Francis, I read yesterday, he just made a really wonderful statement about climate change. And he's talking about all of these same things.
Did he follow up with anything on contraception?
Well, okay, but he did say when he talked to so many million people in Manila, he actually said, just because we can breed like rabbits doesn't mean we should. For a pope to say that?
Yes, yeah.
Good for him.
Yeah, good for him.
I mean, he actually is quite remarkable as a pope, I think.
Yes, so do I.
Yeah. And he's a Jesuit, which is probably why.
Can we talk about the work the Jane Goodall Institute does? And I have a sense that you are as proud of this as you are of anything because of the message they're taking to how many countries now?
Roots and Shoots is in 35 countries. And in some countries it does better than others. And it depends really who's leading the organization. You know, we've got Melanie, and she's really grown JGI in many different ways. So all over New Zealand, really.
It's something I know that the CEO and the chairman are both so proud of you being here and so overwhelmingly delighted to have you here, and the support, the money that's being raised through these events will make a real difference. It will get those programs to schools, won't it?
And we've got great volunteers as well.
Yeah, hell of a lot of volunteers. Can we talk about your impact as an ecologist? Now, if we look at this, so it's the International New York Times, and there you are on the front page. And there you are, huge on the front page. And I don't believe, except maybe David Attenborough, maybe, that there is anybody else who does what you do who would get that photo. So once again, that position, that placement, so once again, this places an enormous sense of responsibility, an almost onerous burden on you. But you're absolutely up for it, aren't you?
It's not fair, really, is it? Because it is a huge responsibility. And you say, there I am, huge up there. But I don't feel huge. I feel small. I mean, I've been built into this figure, this huge figure on the front page of Geographic and New York Times, really mostly by the Geographic, by the media. And so I have to try and live up to that iconic status that's been thrust upon me. Do my best.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. The last photo, and I'm not at it yet, but is of a young you with your notebook. And I don't want to go, I sort of want to end on it. But you know the photo, it's that lovely black and white photo. You're sitting in the camp, you've got a notebook, and I think it's at the end of the day, and you're possibly recording what you've seen that day. What would you say to her? Would you say your responsibility is the effort? You've got to do it. It's going to be hard. It's going to be exhausting. You're going to be on the road 300 days a year. Or would you say, get the hell out?
You mean back then?
Yeah.
Well, I couldn't have imagined it. I mean, it was just, I don't know. I would probably have, I was so scared of the media when I first was forced to come out because of the Geographic. And the first time I had to make a speech, I was very shy and I was completely terrified. And so can you imagine my first speech was to 5,000 people? It was for the Geographic in Washington, D.C., and I was completely petrified. Okay, there was a film to go with it, but I was doing all the talking and I had to, talk around it and answer questions. So I was kind of practicing a little bit at home, and I made a vow. 1, I will never read a speech, and I'll always have notes, but 2, I'll never say, or I'll try never to say and And I don't know if you listen, but I almost never do.
Oh, you don't?
No. That's because I vowed not to.
And when you were speaking to those 5,000 people, this is about Gombe, right? Did you sense, listen to this room now. It's quiet.
It's very quiet.
Yeah, it is. But that's because people want to hear what you've got to say, right? And did you hear the silence? Did you think, wow, they're listening? And was there a power in that? Did you realize early on?
The first time I made a speech, the first few times, I was too scared to listen, to hear, to do anything but somehow get through it. But I did realize after the first time that I had a gift. I had a gift that I worked on, but it's a gift. And I think if you're given gifts, you have to try and use them. So one gift is a strong body. I've got good genes, or I couldn't travel like this. And 2, it's a gift of communication. I've always loved writing, and I suddenly discovered I could speak.
And people wanted to listen.
And people want to listen. That's a gift.
Yeah, you work at your gifts, don't you? You don't.
Yes, of course I work at it.
Yeah.
And there's dear Louis Leakey. Those special people in my life. That's my mother, my dog Rusty, David Greybeard, Louis Leakey. He gave me the chance of a lifetime.
Can I just interrupt you there? You said there are special people in my life. My mother, my dog Rusty.
David Greybeard and Louis Leakey.
So only 4 of those people are people. So of the 4 people,
2.
only 2 of them are people, yeah.
Yeah, well.
But in terms of their impact on you and their importance to you, they're equivalents in a way.
Yeah, they are. They all were very, very special. Of course, there are hundreds of other people that I care about and love and have helped me and all the rest of it. But those 4 really stand out as, being pivotal. I probably should add my supervisor at Cambridge, because he really enabled me to grow into the scientific world, which if I hadn't done that, I couldn't have helped the chimps in the labs. So I should add Robert Hind as well. That's 3 people and 2 animals.
That's a good ratio, 60-40. What did he know about you? I know that, you're beautifully self-effacing when you tell a story, the fact that you had secretarial skills and you were keen and you were well-read and you were there. But he charged you with something extraordinary. And when you delivered beyond what even his wildest expectations would have been, he made sure that you were taken seriously by getting you into Cambridge through a PhD with no undergraduate degrees. He believed in you.
Yes, he did.
And at some level, he must have known you would do this. Do you think he knew? Do you think he understood you possibly better than you understood yourself?
Well, he must have, because he tells me he'd been looking for a person to study chimps for 10 years. The reason he wanted somebody to study chimpanzees and then gorillas and then orangutans was that, you know, he believed he was searching for the fossilized remains of early Stone Age humans. And from a skull, from a skeleton, you can tell an awful lot about what the creature looked like, whether it was upright, from the teeth what was sort of food it was eating, but behavior doesn't fossilize. So he believed, and now he's proved right by everybody really, that about 6 million years ago, there was an ape-like, human-like common ancestor. So he argued that if JGINZ's behavior is similar or identical in chimpanzees today and humans today, maybe that behavior was present in that common ancestor and came with us on our long, separate evolutionary journeys, and maybe that would give me, he said, a better feeling for how Stone Age humans used to behave. And that's more or less what everybody thinks now.
He was an extraordinary man, wasn't he?
He was an extraordinary man. Extraordinary man. Made some amazing finds. And you know, he took me to Olduvai Gorge in the middle of Serengeti. I think it was about 8 or 9 years, he and his wife were absolutely sure that the smooth stones had been used by early man. And everybody else said no, they hadn't. And there were no early men there, but he found them. Homo habilis was the first. But luckily when I went for 3 months, no human remains had been found. So it was just us and animals, and it was such a magical world. And I think that's where he really decided I was who he'd been looking for. Because he liked the way I behaved when I met a rhino and met a lion. He said I had behaved just right.
Well, you didn't get eaten, did you?
I didn't get eaten. It was like when I got to Gombe and I would hear, and I was scared of leopards for some reason. I don't think I need to be, but I was, and I'd be up there sleeping on my own because near the chimps, to be there when they woke up in the morning, and I'd hear a leopard. So I just pulled the blanket over my head, you know, I was lying on the ground, and people say, well, you were so stupid, but I sort of felt that I was meant to be there, and therefore the animals wouldn't hurt me. Stupid? Maybe, but they didn't.
And you were right.
Yes. Nothing hurt me. There were buffalo, there were leopards, there were bush pigs, which can be quite mean. And chimps are like 10 times stronger than me.
We've got a couple more questions, but we've also got some questions from the floor, and we'll leave this up. But there are 2 people here tonight, Harry Pickett and Autumn Lindsay. Harry and Autumn, I don't know. Now, Autumn, I think you might be quite young. Autumn, I think you might be here as a birthday present. So Harry and Autumn have been chosen from email entries and various social media forums to come up and ask questions. So that's the microphone there. So do make your way up. And Autumn, I don't know how old you are, but you're allowed to bring a parental guardian with you if you feel a bit shy about coming up. But we're delighted to have you. And Autumn, if you're much older than very young, I apologise unreservedly for being a condescending... Autumn, you look like you can handle yourself all right to me. So... I just want to read this line out. The greatest dangers to our wildlife are greed, poverty, corruption, and apathy. And greed is the first word. And our greed and our entitlement and our arrogance are so problematic, aren't they?
Yeah, they really are. And it was Mahatma Gandhi who said, the planet can provide for human need, but not human greed.
Gosh, that's a good answer. Autumn, tell us a little bit about yourself. How old are you? Oh, is that you? Sorry, that's... So who have I got? So I've got Autumn and I've got... Sorry, I've got... Who are you?
Harry.
Oh, hello. Harry, I'm John. It's really lovely to meet you. And Harry, how old are you?
12.
Well, it's a fantastic age. And what school do you go to?
Southland Girls High School.
Well, we're delighted to have you with us. And are you a bit of a fan of James?
Yeah.
Well, we really look forward to your question. Thank you for coming up and asking it.
What has been the driving force that has led you to where you are now?
What's the driving force for?
Getting you to where you are now. What is the driving force? It's a good question, Harry. Thank you very much.
Well, it's the kind of question that I already said I wish somebody would study to answer for me. But basically the driving force is I'm passionate about animals. I'm passionate about the wilderness areas that are so beautiful and get this spiritual connection. But I'm also passionate about future generations. And, you know, children. I have grandchildren. I have a child. I have 3 grandchildren. And I think 2 of my grandchildren might produce great-grandchildren within the next few years. And if we carry on with business as usual, what's their future going to be like? What's the future of your children going to be like? So I'm a very obstinate kind of person, and I'm not going to sit back and let the Trumps and all the others just get it all their own way if I can do anything about it.
Harry, that was a fantastic question. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Autumn. Autumn, not that this is material, it's just the kind of question that middle-aged people always ask you. How old are you?
I'm 13.
Right. And what school are you at?
Ellesmere College.
And is it a good school?
Yeah, it is.
Good. Yeah, you kind of have to say that with all these people. Yeah. What's your question, Autumn?
Climate change can be a scary topic for young people, so how do you deal with, like, the idea of what's probably going to be at this rate impending doom?
Well, it is doom indeed if we don't do something about it. And I think all these marches of young people is raising awareness about the problem. But we really have to all do our little bit. It's no good just marching. We have to act. And if we start acting, and we all act together, but we can't leave it. We've got to act now. But don't think that it's inevitable doom. It's not. It's not inevitable doom. But we have to all get together and do our little bit to avert continuing increased heating of the globe. Won't be easy, and we have to somehow persuade politicians, but more and more countries are actually beginning to say, well, we will try and limit our emissions.
You know what? Autumn, when I hear a 13-year-old say we're doomed, I feel so sad.
Yeah, but this is why I started Roots and Shoots. So what you need to do is join Roots and Shoots, get it going in your school, and when you and your friends are actually taking action and seeing that you're making a local difference, and know that young people like you all around the world are doing their bit too, that's when you'll start feeling it's not inevitable doom. Because if you think it's inevitable doom, you'll give up, because why would you bother to do anything if there's no point? You see? It's exactly because of you that I started Roots and Shoots. I met so many people like you.
We need you, Autumn.
But now they've changed.
We do.
And you will change too. So your job now is to get Roots and Shoots going in your school. You say it's a good school, so...
We're almost at the end. I want to read from Harvest for Hope, A Guide to Mindful Eating. Michael Pollan, this is you writing this, likens consumer choices to pulling single threads out of a garment. We pull a thread from the garment when we refuse to purchase eggs or meat from birds who were raised in confinement, whose beaks were clipped so they could never once taste their natural diet of worms and insects. We pull out a thread when we refuse to bring home a hormone-fattened turkey for Thanksgiving dinner. We pull a thread when we refuse to buy meat or dairy products from cows who were never allowed to chew grass or breathe fresh air or feel the warm sun on their backs. The more threads we pull, the more difficult it is for the industry to stay intact. You demand eggs and meat without hormones, and the industry will have to figure out how it can raise farm animals without them. Let the animals graze outside and it slows production. Eventually the whole thing will have to unravel. And so we have power as consumers, don't we?
We have, yes, huge power as consumers, as long as we remove poverty. I mean, it comes back to this again and again and again. If you're really poor, you have no choice. You have to take the only way that you can survive, don't you? You know, because I've met extreme poverty, not just in the developing world. I've met extreme poverty in Native American reservations in America, the richest country in the world. I've met extreme poverty in the UK, where we have the worst scenario of children who are, you know, they only get one meal a day from school, and in the holidays they're starving. So we've got to somehow, and I somehow feel it's easier to alleviate poverty than to change the lifestyle of those of the rest of us who have more than we need. And you can think of little ways. Supposing all countries took the route of Costa Rica and said, we won't have an army and we won't develop weapons anymore. We could alleviate poverty with that money just like that.
It's almost time for us to go, and we're going to end on something really magic. But I'm going to try and summarize what we've learned, what I've learned from you tonight. And what I've learned from you first and foremost is what a difference an individual can make. If an individual sets her heart on making a difference. You talked before when you were speaking about the combination of head and heart. And you are the personification of that combination. You've talked about the effort of will that is required to do this for 300 days a year. And Autumn, I know you've gone back to your chair, but you need to form Roots and Shoots at your school. You need to do that in honour of Jane, and also in honour of Dr. Jane Goodall's message that the individual can make a difference. And that's what you're telling us. And that's why this evening has been one that is, in some respects, contradictory. On the one hand, our collective acknowledgement that the planet is in trouble. And it is in trouble because of our behaviour. On the other hand, your message that we can change our behaviour and therefore pull the planet back from the brink, right? That's why you travel.
Yep.
That's why you exhaust yourself. That's why you go day after day after day, simply to tell us that if we change our behaviour, we can save the planet. It's
That's
not
right.
too late, is it?
That's exactly right. And look at all the people in this place. You know, a little boy in Burundi, he was 7 years old, and I'd been talking about Roots and Shoots, and he came up to me after my talk with little African boy with big eyes, and he said, if I pick up a piece of litter every day, won't it make a difference? And I said, yes, but supposing you persuade 10 of your friends to pick up a piece of litter, and supposing each one of them persuades 10 of their friends to pick up a piece of litter. And he said, we'll change the whole country. There won't be any litter left. Little boy of 7.
We're going to end on a video.
So can I introduce the video?
Oh, I'd love it if you would.
Well, it's a video. I told everybody earlier that it wasn't only human beings who had an indomitable spirit. And I also talked about how we started sanctuaries for orphan chimpanzees whose mothers have been shot mostly for the bushmeat trade. And so the largest sanctuary for orphan chimps in Africa is in the Republic of Congo. It's called Chimpunga. And it's run by an amazing woman. She's Spanish, she's a veterinarian, Rebecca. And she's really given so many little chimps who come in wounded a second chance. So this video, which some of you may have seen, It's about a chimpanzee called Wounda, and in the local language that means close to death. So when Wounda first arrived at the sanctuary, she was a tiny infant, wounded by the bullet that had killed her mother, and Rebecca nursed her back to life. And then when she was about 9 years old, she got really, really sick, and again Rebecca saved her life. And so this video is about when Wounda is released onto this beautiful island. And I want you to remember while you watch it, I never met Wounda until this day. I'd never met her before. And that's why what happened is so extraordinary. And if you watch really closely, you'll see a little kiss on my arm. You won't see it if you're not looking for it. But while you watch, what I want you to do is to imagine you're there and imagine the magic of the moment, of the scene, the experience that I had on that very special day. This is a really exciting moment for me. The Jane Goodall Institute's Chimpunga Chimpanzee Rehabilitation Center in the Republic of Congo has for years been caring for infants whose mothers were killed, mostly for the illegal bushmeat trade. Many of them are now fully grown. Recently, we acquired 3 large forested islands on the beautiful Quilu River, where we can release many of the chimpanzees from our overcrowded center. In here is Wounda, and she nearly died, but thanks to Rebecca, she came back from the dead. And here she is about to come out into this paradise. She's the 15th chimpanzee to get her freedom here. And we hope ultimately to have about 60 on the island. Today is the first time I've met Wounda. I talked to her on the boat, trying to reassure her. She must have wondered what was happening. None of us could predict exactly what she would do once the cage door opened. It was a very, very touching moment. One of the most amazing things that's ever happened to me. The warmth of her embrace is something I shall never forget. For Wounda and all the other chimpanzees we're working to bring here, Chinzula Island will provide a wonderful forest home where they will be cared for and safe. So I think you felt the magic of that moment, and we can't understand it, but it happened. But I want to just give you an update. All of our females, and the number of chimps in Chimpunga is close to 170. It's the biggest sanctuary in Africa. Very, very expensive. We have to buy food for them, we have to pay the staff, and you know, in Africa it's expensive. So all of our females are on birth control because we can't afford to look after hundreds more babies. But in all these years, 2 females, their birth control, their implant went wrong, and one of those was Wounda. And so she's out on the island. She's now the dominant female in a group of 30. And she had a baby. 3 years ago, she had a baby. Perfect birth, mother and child doing well, and we decided to call that baby Hope.
That's a great, great note to end on, because that is the theme of tonight, hope, and the difference an individual can make. You have made an extraordinary difference, Dr. Jane Goodall, and it has been such a pleasure being with you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your effort. Thank you for your generosity. Thank you for your head and heart. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Jane Goodall.